President Obama threatens North Korea over the Sony hack, touts a new beginning with Cuba, and calls 2014 a breakthrough year for America. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. President Obama today filled his Christmas season end-of-the-year news conference with visions, not of sugar plums dancing, but of equally sweet accomplishments from his administration. But in a session filled mostly with softball questions, the hard reality of the Sony hacking lent a bitter taste to the proceedings. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry begins our coverage tonight.
Before bolting to Hawaii for a two-week vacation, President Obama pinned blame for the Hollywood hack squarely at the feet of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, though Mr. Obama would not answer whether U.S. sanctions or even military action are on the table.
We will respond proportionally, and we'll respond in a place and time and manner that we choose.
That came after the FBI issued a sharply worded statement claiming strong evidence against North Korea. The FBI calling this one of the gravest national security dangers and vowing the agency will identify, pursue, and impose costs and consequences on individuals, groups, or nation states who wage cyber attacks, as the president seemed resigned to the fact that America will keep getting hit.
They're going to be costly. They're going to be serious, but we can't start changing our patterns of behavior any more than we stop going to a football game because there might be the possibility of a terrorist attack.
Shortly after the news conference, administration officials confirmed the first response under consideration is returning the regime back to America's list of state sponsors of terror, while officials also all but admitted that the president's mention of a proportional response is a sign the U.S. will hit North Korea with cyber weapons as well, with a White House official saying flatly, quote, "Some responses you'll see and others you may not." While the president stopped short of calling it an act of war, Republicans are not, and say without a firmer response, more companies will face a barrage.
If you treat this simply as an inconvenience, other countries will conclude that they can attack and get away with it. And particularly with this administration, what they've just done on Cuba, among other things, it's a weak presidency, and I think those that have the cyber capability will use it.
The company under assault from North Korea, Sony Pictures Entertainment, is also now dealing with criticism from the commander-in-chief.
There were threats against its employees. I am sympathetic to the concerns that they faced. Having said all that, yes, I think they made a mistake.
In the most curious moment of his session with reporters, the president put the onus on the company by saying if only its officials had reached out to him.
I wish they'd spoken to me first. I would have told them, do not get into a pattern in which you're intimidated by these kinds of criminal attacks.
Reporters did not press for an answer on why the president or his aides did not call the company while it was under the gun, though Sony CEO Michael Linton pushed back on the president to CNN, saying his company did not cave. It simply had no other choice but to cancel the movie The Interview because many movie theaters vowed they would not carry it under the threat of attack.
Josh has given me the who's been naughty and who's been nice list, and I'm going to use it to take some questions.
The president called on reporters who only pressed him mildly as he pushed a narrative that he's finishing the year strong, and went unchallenged as he promised to work with the new Republican Congress where he can, while still vowing to take unilateral action as often as possible.
So I intend to continue to do what I've been doing, which is where I see a big problem and the opportunity to help the American people, and it is within my lawful authority to provide that help, I'm going to do it.
Just like his predecessor, George W. Bush, who vowed to sprint to the finish, this president dealt with his lame duck status by declaring he's racing to the end zone.
My presidency is entering the fourth quarter. Interesting stuff happens in the fourth quarter, and I'm looking forward to it.
Now, after the news conference, I noticed that some White House aides had on their desks these note cards on White House stationery that said, "We're in the fourth quarter," quoting the president, clearly trying to inspire them to raise their game in the new year. And the president will have a chance to do that on January 20th when Speaker John Boehner has invited him to deliver the State of the Union address. Brett?
You know, Ed, on social media, there were a lot of people, wondering about pointed questions. Why weren't there more or more pointed follow-ups? But there was something historic about the questions today.
Interesting, because the president only called on female female reporters. I think there were 7, 8, 9 reporters. Kind of cool. I spoke to Josh Earnest about it. He said it was his idea. He suggested to the president. He thought usually the male reporters get the large majority of the questions. It would be interesting and historic for the president to do that. He did make that bit of history. Look, there's going to be good questions and bad questions when there's female reporters or male reporters. I've certainly asked bad questions and good questions, probably.
We'll go back to the tape. That's right. Ed, thank you.
Okay.
While there is general agreement in Washington that something needs to be done about the Sony situation with North Korea, there is little consensus on President Obama's intention to restore relations with Cuba. Correspondent Doug McKelway has that part of the story tonight.
3 days ago, it wasn't even on the radar. Now the president's reset with Cuba has upended 53 years of established order, 53 years of a contentious relationship.
I don't anticipate overnight changes. But what I know deep in my bones is that if you've done the same thing for 50 years and nothing's changed, you should try something different if you want a different outcome.
The reset has already broken up established alignments in Washington, creating unlikely marriages out of sometime adversaries.
The president said the current policy had not worked. Yes, it has. It has marginalized the Cubans. The Cubans have not been as robust in their efforts.
I think it stinks. I think it's wrong. I'm deeply disappointed in the president. And to hear that this has been in the works for over a year and have no engagement and no conversation and no consultation is pretty upsetting.
While producing such opposite party bedfellows, the Cuba plan has also stirred some intra-party conflict too. Potential GOP presidential candidate Rand Paul supports the Cuban normalization.
The 50-year embargo with Cuba just hadn't worked. I mean, if the goal was regime change, it sure doesn't seem to be working. And probably it punishes the people more than the regime, because the regime can blame the embargo for hardship.
While two other presumed GOP presidential hopefuls don't. Former Florida Governor Jeb Bush saying, quote, it undermines America's credibility. Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio goes further, threatening to use congressional authority to undo it.
I intend to use every tool at our disposal in the majority to unravel as many of these changes as possible. And I do so not out of any sort of animosity towards the administration, but out of animosity towards the Cuban regime's repression of the Cuban people.
President Obama said only Congress can fully repeal the Cuba embargo, but all this realignment throws congressional action into some doubt.
And I will certainly weigh in. I think that ultimately we need to go ahead and pull down the embargo, but I don't anticipate that happens right away. I think people are going to want to see how does this move forward before there's any serious debate.
Adding to the unusual realignments the Cuba normalization has set into motion, both conservatives and liberals are drawing on the words of Ronald Reagan to make their case. Some supporters of the reset cite Reagan's belief in free markets to effect change, while some opponents cite his staunch anti-communist views to make theirs. Brett?
Doug, thank you. Steve Harrigan reports, by the way, from Havana in just a few minutes on how this change in policy could affect the people of Cuba. In other news tonight, whether an Army sergeant released earlier this year from Taliban custody ends up in another kind of prison may soon be known. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is at the Pentagon tonight.
Sergeant Bo Bergdahl's fate could soon be known. The Army report on whether he deserted his base before being captured by the Taliban has been complete since October. Today, Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel was briefed on the findings.
I won't be reading out the briefing that he gets. This is an Army investigation.
The Pentagon refused to release the report and remained firm that Hagel did not plan to brief the White House on the results.
The Secretary's not going to do any arm twisting for the Army. There's no role for him in the process to modify the investigation.
If it is not subject to change, why are they holding it? Why don't
I've
they
answered the question. I've answered the question.
Well, but we don't get it. I mean, the Secretary gets to see it. The question is, why doesn't everybody else get to see it? We've been waiting for a while now. It's been done since
I suspect that at the appropriate time, the Army will make the investigation public at the appropriate time. That time is not going to be today.
Desertion is a legal term, and the Uniform Code of Military Justice defines it as treason during wartime. Such a conclusion would require further legal proceedings. Bergdahl walked off his base in Afghanistan on June 30th, 2009, after mailing most of his personal belongings home. He was released this summer in a controversial prisoner swap in exchange for 5 Taliban leaders held at Guantanamo Bay. The nonpartisan Government Accountability Office concluded the Pentagon broke the law because because it did not inform lawmakers 30 days before the transfer, as required by Congress. Retired Army Sergeant Jordan Vaughn went on 50 missions to find Bergdahl after he disappeared.
I think that Bergdahl is an absolute disgrace to America. You can't even remotely compare him to soldiers that gave their lives in the field of combat for America.
That is one of the issues that the Secretary of the Army must adjudicate, whether Bergdahl will receive $300,000 in back pay and other benefits that accumulated during his 5 years in captivity. Brett.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. The U.S. is not prepared for a catastrophic disaster. That is the finding of a Government Accountability Office report obtained by the Associated Press. It says preparations to deal with a nuclear attack or other large-scale event are years behind. The report also says a lack of coordination between federal agencies has hurt responses to previous disasters like Superstorm Sandy. Up next, how the Sony hacking could give new power to Al Sharpton. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 45 in Baltimore with Olympic swimming star and Baltimore native Michael Phelps pleading guilty to DUI charges. Phelps received a 1-year suspended prison sentence and 18 months of probation. He cannot drink alcohol during that time. Fox 13 in Tampa with an early Christmas for a wounded warrior. A group of volunteers tore down a rickety fence belonging to retired Marine Mike Delancey and replaced it with a new vinyl fence. Delancey served in Iraq and is confined to a wheelchair. The new fence will keep his 4 Rottweilers in the backyard. And this is a live look at Las Vegas from our affiliate there, Fox 5. The big story there tonight is authorization for the first drone testing facility in Nevada. However, it got off to a bumpy start after the first unmanned aircraft authorized to fly without FAA supervision, as you see, crashed during a ceremony in Boulder City. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.